Hello and welcome to Intro to Programming. All right, so today we're going to continue learning about JavaScript, and we're going to be using JavaScript to interact with an HTML form and use it to produce some output and do some error checking and a whole bunch of other cool stuff. All right, so hopefully at this point you have downloaded these files from either Google Classroom or from my email, all right, Converter Lab. Again, remember this is a zip file. So after you have it downloaded, we have to unzip it. So I'm going to right click on it. I'm going to choose extract all. All right, the default is usually fine. So I'm just going to click extract. All right, and then you'll see that it automatically opens up the window. But I now have a second folder here, one of which is zipped, one is which is unzipped. So I'm going to get rid of the zipped one and just keep the unzipped one. All right, now inside of here, I have two files, converter and form demo. All right, we're going to start in form demo. So I'm going to right click on this. I'm going to edit it with Notepad++. And then I'm instantly just going to look at it in Chrome so that you can see what it does. All right, so here's our beautiful page. You'll see that there's a little form up here. All right, it says distance in meters, distance in miles. And then there's a button that says convert to miles and convert to meters. So you've probably seen these sort of things on the internet, like quick little calculators that can do conversions or, specific calculations. That's what we're going to be doing today. We're going to be making one of these like converter calculator type deals. So on this demo here, if I type in a distance in meters, so let's say I type in 10,000 meters, and then I click convert to miles, you'll see that it gives me the conversion down in that second box there. All right. If I put in something like, all right, 26.2 miles, and I want to know how many meters that is, I can click the convert to meters, and it will tell me that that's, 42,163 meters. All right. So it can go in either direction. And in addition to that, it also has some error checking built in. So if I leave the meters box blank, and then I try to convert it to miles, it's going to say, please enter a valid value. If I type the word banana into the box and I try to convert banana to miles, it's also going to tell me I have to enter a valid value. All right, so if I put in anything in this box other than basically a number, it's going to give me some sort of error message. All right, and the same thing is true down here. If I leave this one blank and try to convert it to meters, it's going to give me an error. If I type apple in here and try to convert it to meters, it's going to give me an error. But if I type in 1 mile and try to convert that to meters, it'll work just fine. All right, so that's kind of the gist of what this does. Now let's take a look at the code so we can see how this is all happening. All right, so here I have it in Notepad++. All right, so we're going to just kind of scroll quickly down to the bottom here to look at the HTML, and then we'll go back to the JavaScript. So here we have our body tag. The style here is just setting up the background image. That's what's making the track show up on the back. Here we have our form tag. All right, so this is defining our form. And you can see that I made the background color white, the font color is black, and I set a width for it. New are these two input tags here. So I have this input tag, and it says type equals text, and then ID equals meters. And then I have a second one here that says distance in miles, input type equals text, ID equals miles. This type thing is what allows me to specify what's actually showing up in my form. So I could put different things here. I could make buttons show up. I could make like checkboxes show up. I can have text boxes show up. I can have password text boxes show up. We're not really going to go deep into this because we're not making a lot of forms, but just realize this type is what's specifying what actually shows up on the screen. So when I say type text, it's showing up as a text box that the user can type into. All right. Then down here, we have two more inputs, and these, instead of being type text, are type button. All right. So last class we saw, or 2 classes ago, we saw that we could use the button tag. All right, we can also use this input tag and set the type to button, and that will have it'll look similar on the page. So the value here is what shows up as the text on the button, and the on-click we've seen before, this is the function that's going to be called. All right, so again, we're not going to go really deep into forms. It's not anything we're spending a lot of time on, but they're here. It's something that you can set up, and this just kind of gives you a quick example of a very, very simple form where I've got these input tags, and they can have different types that affect how they show up inside the form. All right. Let's look at the code or the JavaScript, because that's the part that we're really focused on today. Right? That's the part that's going to be a little more interesting and a little more relevant to you when you're working on your lab. All right, so at the very top, I have my variables. All right, we learned last time that variables are sort of like memory for the program. They allow us to store information and then use that information in different ways. Now, the variables can be called whatever you want, but generally you want to pick names that are relevant to what they deal with. So this is my variable that's going to hold information about meters. This is my variable that's going to hold information about miles. Again, you need to have these let statements at the very start. All right, you need to have these declarations is what they're technically called, but they're like let statements from algebra before you can use these variables. So this is saying, let there be a variable meter, and from this point forward, I can use the variable meter. Let there be a variable mile, and then from this point forward, I can use the variable mile. All right, so let's look at one of these functions because they work pretty much exactly the same. It's just one goes in one direction and one goes in the other direction. So when somebody clicks on the convert to miles button, the very first thing we do is say meter equals document.getElementById meters dot value. So what is that line of code actually doing? Well, if we look down in our HTML, we can find out which piece has the ID meters. All right, so if we scroll down and we find the ID meters, we can see that's our input box. All right, that's the input box where somebody types in a value in meters. All right, so they've typed in their value in meters. They've typed it into the box. They click on the convert to miles button, and the very first thing we do is read in the information from the web page that the user just typed in and save it in our variable. So our variable meter is now going to have whatever number they typed into the web page. All right, that's what this dot value is doing. It's going into that input box and retrieving the value that the user has typed into it. All right, so we've got document.getElementById meters dot value. This is now saved in our meter variable. All right, right below that is our error checking. All right, this is to make sure that they typed in something valid. So what we're doing is we're looking in the variable meter. Dot trim just gets rid of any like spaces. So if somebody just went in the box and hit a bunch of spaces, so they technically didn't leave it blank, but all they put in were spaces, the dot trim would get rid of the spaces. And then we're saying, like, once you get rid of all the spaces, does it equal essentially nothing? All right, is it empty quotes? There's nothing in between these quotes is another way of saying, like, did they leave it blank? Is there nothing in there? So if it's empty, and then these two vertical lines are the OR command. All right, we saw OR at the very beginning of the course, and what we learned about OR was that it didn't require both parts to be true. It only required one of the parts to be true. So this is saying if they left the box blank, or, and then this is another JavaScript function that is NaN, is not a number. So it's looking in this variable and checking to see if it's a number. So if the box is blank, or if not a number is true, then we're going to give out an error message. So in plain English, if they left it blank or if they typed in a word, it's going to give them an error message. All right. If it's not blank and it's not a word, then we go down to the else section. All right. And this is where we actually do the conversion. So we say mile equals meter, which again, remember the very first thing we did was retrieve the value. So we're dividing meter by 1609.3. We're storing that value in our mile variable. And then we're sending that result back to the screen. So we're saying document.getElementById miles.value equals mile. It's taking whatever's in our mile variable and putting it back out to the screen. All right, so again, a lot here, but let's just go back and think about it in plain English terms. So what we're doing is we're going and figuring out what they typed in. That's what this line does. It figures out what they typed into the box. Then we make sure that they didn't leave the box empty, or they didn't type in like a word or something, or some like nonsense that isn't a value. If they didn't, then we perform the calculation and then send the results back to the screen. All right, so again, a lot of code, a lot of syntax there, but a pretty straightforward concept. Now, if we go down the convert to meters, it basically just does the same thing in reverse. All right, it goes into the document, finds what they typed in the miles box, and saves it in the mile variable. Then it makes sure that the mile variable isn't empty, and it makes sure that the mile variable is actually a number. If it's not a number, we give them an error message. If they left it blank, we give them an error message. Otherwise, we do the calculation, we store it in our meter variable, and then we send that meter variable back to the screen. All right, so we're saying document.getElementById value equals meter. That's what's going to make it show up on the screen. So let's go back to the actual page for a second and just kind of think about what's happening. So I go into the meters box, I type in a number, right? When I click on convert to miles, what my code's going to do is it's going to take this number, it's going to save it into a variable. It's then going to check to make sure that that variable has a number in it and that it's not blank or letters. And then after it checks that, it's going to do the calculation and then write the answer to the screen. Now, when I click convert to miles, all you see is a quick answer show up, but that's what's happening step by step by step. All right, and the same thing in the other direction. So, if I click this convert to meters, it's going to look in this box. It's going to save it in the miles variable. If it's blank, it's going to give me an error message. If I type in a word, it's going to give me an error message. Only when I type in a number is it actually going to go in, perform the calculation, and then write it out to the screen. All right, so what you're going to be doing today is something very similar. All right, you're going to be setting up something very similar to this, only for a different calculation. All right, so let's take a look at the file you're going to be using. So in here is a second file called Converter. You can click Edit with Notepad++. All right, you can view it in Chrome. And it's the same general idea, only your calculator is going to be converting from Fahrenheit to Celsius. All right, so eventually what's going to happen is somebody's going to be able to type in a value in Fahrenheit. They're going to click convert to Celsius, and this box is going to fill in. Or if they type in a temperature in Celsius and they convert it to Fahrenheit, this box in here is going to fill in. All right, so that's your job today, is to set this up so that it can do those conversions. Now, if we look at the code, the form has already been set up for you. All right, so here's your text boxes, here's your buttons, all of that's already been set up. Things that you need to pay attention to down here in the HTML are as follows. You need to pay attention to the IDs of the input boxes. So notice this one has an ID of far. And this one has an ID of cell. All right, those are going to be relevant when you're doing your document.getElementByIDs. All right, and then notice down here on the input buttons, notice the names of the functions. All right, this one's called convert to C. This one's called convert to F. So both of those are relevant when you're creating your code up above. So again, I've got the first function set up for you here. I mean, not really set up, just the empty function here, convert to C. What you're going to have to do is then create the variables and set up the code. And what I would encourage you to do is keep looking back at this right here. All right, because this is your guide on how to do this. Now, I am going to help you get started here. All right, so I'm going to get the ball rolling, but I'm not going to do the whole thing with you. All right, you're going to have to kind of pick up where I leave off. So let's get started here. All right, the first one is called convert to Celsius. That's the function we're writing. All right, so if we think about what that means, if we're trying to convert to Celsius, it means somebody typed a number in the Fahrenheit box. Hopefully they typed a number in the Fahrenheit box and then clicked the convert to Celsius. So when they click convert to Celsius, the first thing we need to do is read in this Fahrenheit number. All right, so I'm going to go back to my code. I'm going to create a variable to hold that information. All right, if I want to read in that Fahrenheit information, I have to create a variable to do it. So I'm going to say var, and then I don't want to have to type Fahrenheit every single time I want to use my variable. I'm not even sure how to spell Fahrenheit. I mean, I am sure, but you get what I'm saying. Like, don't make your life more difficult. In this case, I'm just going to call my variable F, all right? I'm going to call my other variable C, but like F and C, like don't make your life harder than it has to be. Pick variable names that are relevant. You know, F is pretty relevant when you're talking about Fahrenheit. C is pretty relevant when you're talking about Celsius, but don't like make them big, long things that you're going to have to type out over and over again and could potentially make mistakes and causing you problems in your code. All right, so there's my variable. Now, the very first thing I'm going to do is read the number that they typed into the box into my variable. So I'm going to say F equals document dot get element by ID. Now I have to look up what the ID is so that I get the right value. And if I scroll down, I can see that here's my temperature in Fahrenheit box. Here's the input where they're actually typing it in. And the ID for that box is FAR, FAR, short for Fahrenheit. So I'm going to go quotes FAR. That's the input box that I want to read from. And then I'm going to say dot value. So that's taking the value from that text box and reading it into my new variable F. Right. Now, that's as far as I'm going to go with you on this. What I would recommend you do next is go back to your sample code. All right. Look at the error checking. Look how this if else is set up. And then you're going to have to do something similar for yours. All right. You're going to be performing a calculation. It's going to be a different calculation, obviously, but I give you the formula in the lab document. All right. It's not like you have to look it up. And then you're going to be writing that result back to the screen. All right. Now be careful. There's a second variable on this line, so don't forget to create your second variable when you need to use it. And then make sure you're paying attention to the ID so that you write it to the correct location. All right. Once you get this one working, you're pretty much going to be doing the same exact thing for the second one, only in the other direction. All right. So if you get the first one working, you should be able to get the second one working because it's the same code, just moving in the other direction. Now, the warning I'll give you is you have to keep things straight, all right? There's going to be a lot of braces. There's going to be a lot of parentheses. There's going to be a lot of stuff going on. So take your time. Be neat about things so that you don't make any like silly mistakes. The other thing that sometimes kids wonder about is like, how do you actually make these vertical lines? All right, basically you're holding shift and then it's the key right above your enter key. You should see a vertical line on it, but you have to hold shift and then you're hitting that key right above your enter key, and that's going to make the vertical lines. All right, so all stuff that you just want to keep track of and be aware of while you're working on this. All right, so as always, let me know if you have any questions. I'm happy to help. Oh, one other thing. Give me a second here. So here's the lab document. Basically, it just tells you generically what you have to do. It gives you the formulas for the actual conversions. And then down here, this is just an optional piece. You don't have to include this in your code, but if you want to, this is a built-in sort of JavaScript function that will allow you to round your answers. I mean, otherwise you can get some like pretty ugly looking decimals. So this will just make it so that your answers look a little neater and they're not going out to like, 8 or 9 decimal points. All right. Not required to put this into your code, but if you surround your calculations with this math.round, and then there's a left parenthesis at the start and a right parenthesis at the end, it will just make your output look a little neater. All right. So again, not required, but a nice little thing just to make it look a little sharper when you're doing it. All right. So this should be everything. Best of luck. As always, if you have any questions, just make sure you reach out and we'll go from there. All right. Have a good one. Bye.